Hello, my name is Matthew Taylor, and welcome to our second Bush Broadcast Deep Dive webinar, where we chat one-on-one with an intern, a PhD student, or researcher to learn about the project that they're working on and where that's taking them and how that's involving our bush heritage reserves. Now, I'm joining you today from Sydney, which is the lands of the Gadigal people, who are the traditional custodians of this country. I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, both past and present, and extend that respect to any other Indigenous Australians who may be online with us today. We recognise that this remarkable Australian environment we look to conserve is on land that's never been ceded, and its future is the responsibility of all of us Australians working together. Now, for those of you familiar with our webinars, the chat function is the place where you can both let us know where you're calling from today. Please do that as you join the webinar if you'd like to. It's also the right spot to put any questions. So please post those at any stage and we'll get back to a 10-minute Q&A session at the end. We've got a special guest today. Her name is Ella Raymond, and she's undertaking a paid internship through our Seeding the Future programme, which we set up so we could offer aspiring conservationists some pathways in their early stages of their career to learn and hone best practice skills, contribute to our conservation work, and provide the opportunity for them to get on country and see what it's really like in some of these wonderful places that we're looking after. So, Ella, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Matthew, and thanks for the introduction. And look, a big hello to everyone who's joined today to talk about buffel grass. Look, first, I'm calling in from Meanjin or Brisbane, and I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which I'm calling in from, the Yagara and Turrbal people. And I'd also like to acknowledge the Wangamudla people, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which this research was based, so out in far South West Queensland, Ethabuka and Pilungah reserves. Thanks for having me.
Well, wonderful to have you today, Ella. What's the weather like up there in Brisbane?
Yep, it's grey and raining in the Sunshine State today, so it's quite lovely though.
Well, it's grey and raining in Sydney, so it's universal. Yeah, excellent, excellent. Well, listen, less of the weather. I know what people are keen to hear about is buffel grass, but first, tell us a little bit about your background, if you would, and why you got into conservation, and also, I guess, where your journey took you and how you ended up working with us. It'd be great to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So why is conservation personally important to me? Look, I was really fortunate. I grew up in a little town nestled amongst the Alpine National Park in Victoria, and I would spend so much time out in nature, and I was just really fascinated by our quirky fauna, our sort of beautiful flora, and the way in which the landscape really changed as you move through it. When I got a little bit older, I started to become aware of some of the challenges that the environment was facing. So whether that was invasive species or habitat loss or climate change, I knew that I wanted to do something about it. So I moved, I was lucky to graduate high school up in Queensland. And at that time, I wanted to study environmental science, but I suppose it wasn't really feasible. So I went into the workforce. And a little over 10 years later, I was really fortunately in the position to be able to enroll in university. So I enrolled at Queensland University of Technology, which is where I completed my environmental science degree and graduated from at the end of 2023. In terms of how I ended up at Bush Heritage, well, it really starts in that final year of uni. I was really lucky to be selected to travel to Malaysia to undertake my final research project, looking at lowland rainforests in the Klang Valley. And that research was led by an amazing professor and an amazing ecologist, Jen Fern from QUT. And she actually called me after I graduated and said, have you seen this opportunity with Bush Heritage, mapping buffel grass? And look, I think if you're studying environmental science or you're at all interested in conservation, you know who Bush Heritage are and what they do. That was definitely the case for me. I'd always been inspired by the work. So they were right up there on top of the list of organisations that I wanted to be involved with. Also, this is a paid internship, so it really facilitates people leaving uni and early career researchers like myself to take on an opportunity like this. So I threw my hat in the ring, and I'm just really lucky to be here.
Fantastic. Well, we're very glad that you are, Ella, and we need to know a little bit more about this weed, this buffel grass, and a little bit about the mapping project you're involved in, because we have so many weedy grass species, don't we, in Australia that have come in for all sorts of reasons. So, love to hear what about the project you're working on, and yeah, tell us a bit more about what's involved in that.
Sure. So the project I'm working on, firstly, it's a part-time project over a 6-month term. And the aim of the internship is really to investigate the feasibility of using remote sensing, specifically open source satellite-derived imagery, to first detect and then map buffel grass on Ethabuka and Pilungah, the reserves. I suppose there's two main outcomes of the project. The first is really in the development of a methodology. So how do you get the imagery? Where do you get it from? How do you process it? And how do you detect buffel grass? And the second is really in the delivery of some maps. So some reserve maps showing the location of buffel on these massive reserves. It can really help the reserve managers and ecologists in their efforts to manage it. And I suppose the method really provides an economic alternative, or addition, I should say, to the field-based detection and monitoring methods that are currently available.
Gotcha. And so we know Buffal's a bit of a favourite of some farmers because of its resilience. I believe that's the main attractive benefit of it, isn't it? In the arid landscapes, which pastoralism uses to raise our beef cattle. But it's actually quite a bit of a concern for conservationists, isn't it? Because it's got some downsides. So I know Pilungah and Ethabuka in Queensland, where you've been, that it's got infestations and they're spreading. So tell us a bit more about what your work is doing in that respect.
Yeah, so that's right. I think firstly, buffel grass, it's a perennial tussock grass that is not native to Australia. So it's native to parts of Africa, the Middle East, East Asia, and it was introduced over 150 years ago. First, it was unintentionally introduced, but since then it's subsequently been intentionally introduced, and typically for, like you say, pasture improvement in arid and semi-arid areas, but also for erosion control and dust suppression. The issue is that since its introduction, buffel has spread to all mainland states and territories, and it causes really devastating impacts to the environment that it spreads into. So the first major impact of buffel, which is probably the most obvious, is that it outcompetes native vegetation, that same native vegetation that our native fauna, mammals, birds, reptiles rely on for food and for habitat. Another major impact of buffel, and if we've got anyone calling in from the Northern Territory, you'll know all about this, is that, and if you've seen it in the environment, it spreads and it creates these huge homogeneous fuel loads that ignite really easily when they dry off. And it causes intense fires that really negatively impact ecosystems that either aren't adapted to that level and intensity of burning, and it destroys old trees and native vegetation and really has the ability to transform shrublands and spinifex plains and native grasslands and woodlands into these monocultures of buffel grass. And in addition to the impacts that I've mentioned, the environmental impacts that I've just mentioned, buffel grass is also a huge impact to Aboriginal culture and country. It alters and reduces the availability and the viability of bush foods and medicinal plants. And it also, through the fires that I just described and the smothering of land, really damages sacred sites. So there's sort of a myriad of impacts of buffel grass. And despite that, or I suppose to talk about its weed status in the country, South Australia have really been leading the charge. They've had buffel declared a weed for many years now, since 2015, I believe. And they've actively been trying to manage buffel grass in the state through a coordinated approach. And some significant work that I can think of by Dr. Marshall through the University of Adelaide really looked at exploring buffel grass through the lens of an invader. But just a few weeks ago, we also have some really exciting news coming out of the Northern Territory, and you can see up on the screen there that buffel grass has actually been declared a weed there. And that's going to be off the back of many, many years of hard work by a lot of people. So I sincerely hope that that means that there'll be some more resources and some more coordinated approach to tackling it in the NT. Despite that, Buffel is really an environmental disaster, and it's only declared a weed in 2 states at the moment.
Yes, well, I guess you're hoping that the example of the first two will lead to more. Um,
Absolutely.
so how do you actually control Buffel once you've got it, if you're trying to get rid of it?
Yeah, sure. I think, look, given its wide distribution, preventing further spread of Buffel is
Mm.
critical. So that can come down to vehicle hygiene and equipment hygiene, making sure you're not transporting Buffel from an area where it is into somewhere that it's not. In terms of
Mm.
managing an existing infestation, an integrated approach is applied, and it really probably depends on the size of the infestation. In smaller cases, mechanical removal, so actually physically digging it out of the ground, or spraying it is probably the most common method. So spraying it with glyphosate, flupropanate, which you can again see on the slide here, Ellen, the reserve manager, tackling it. And something I just want to emphasize, fire is often used as a control method for weeds. In this case, with Buffel grass on its own, it's not a good method. Buffel responds really favorably to fire and can quickly colonize that burnt area. So while I think fire is used in conjunction with other methods, it's not a good option on its own, typically spraying and mechanical removal.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because in the southeast, where we have African lovegrass as a really noxious weed, and one of our other reserves at Scottsdale, the big fires that initially devastated the landscape and caused our reserve manager Phil Palmer to sort of weep as all his work disappeared of years of revegetation. The actual benefit was it burnt off all the what he calls the scab of the lovegrass that had formed a dense mat over the landscape, and he's now got some beautiful regrowth of the herb layer. So it's interesting that each weed needs a very specific management plan, doesn't it? Which I guess your work is helping contribute to.
That's right.
So, in terms of the remote sensing that you're doing, my understanding is then that your work is going to be helping our reserve managers with tools that can get them to identify, locate, and then deal with infestations that, on some of these vast reserves. What does that actually involve? I know there's a technical element to this, and for all our listeners, we've agreed we'll keep it as least technical as possible. But Ella's using some fantastic technical tools. So give us a bit of an insight, if you could, into what you're actually doing.
Yeah, sure. So, look, first, the method was that we came up with was sort of agreed upon after taking a dive into the literature, and I discussed it with my manager, Ellen, so the reserve ecologist, as well as Professor Jen Fern and Al Healy, who's an amazing researcher. And some amazing researchers have actually done this work before. And again, I'll refer to Dr. Marshall, and a lot of researchers in the United States have used various forms of satellite imagery or maybe drone imagery to tackle this problem. So you can see a bit of a graphic on the screen. And the method that I used was essentially trying to exploit the rapid phenological response of buffel grass to summer rain, in that buffel grass greens up very quickly after that rainfall event, quicker than some native vegetation. So the aim was to see if we could capture this greening pattern on the reserves using satellite data. I used 2 remote sensing metrics. The first was NDVI, or Normalized Difference Vegetation Index, and it's a widely used and simple index that's essentially a measure of how green and healthy a plant is. So you run a simple equation using red light and near infrared, and you derive a value between -1 and 1. 1 would be really healthy, lush green vegetation. Values closer to 0 might be bare ground, and negative values are typically like water or snow or something like that. Obviously not snow in the desert. The other metric that I used was fractional cover. So fractional cover is a landscape view of the proportion of land cover types, such as green vegetation, non-photosynthetic vegetation, and bare ground. So looking at this, I started with 200 points of known buffel grass locations or known native grass locations. And I analysed the NDVI and the fractional cover data to see if there were any identifiable trends or patterns in the data before and after a rainfall event. So what you can see on the screen here, those little dots are my known locations, and on the right-hand side, there's a lot of little red dots, which are known buffelgrass locations. So don't worry too much about the next slide in terms of the details in it. But what I'm trying to show here in that left-hand side, which is the buffelgrass locations, there's a pretty obvious response to rainfall. So that's it greening right up after a rainfall event. That's really the moment in time that I wanted to capture using satellite imagery. Sentinel satellite imagery, it's frequently collected, it's open source, so anyone can go and access it. So it's a really good tool. You can see the site Mirica Springs on the screen, and on the left-hand side, it's showing the predicted buffelgrass locations based off the thresholds and time period that I've chosen. And on the right, you've got the fractional cover predictions of the buffelgrass locations. So I use these two metrics and we got a bit of an idea of overlap or where there was a bit of difference. I then generated a series of maps, a lot like what you see there, but for the whole reserve. And after that, it was really time to get out to the field, because up until this point, I'd been looking at these reserves sort of as just giant pixelated blobs on the screen.
Yes, so it sounds like the tool that you're imagining here that might assist the reserve managers is one where if they can access your knowledge, they will be able to say, "Oh, we just had rain. Okay, we need to get some satellite imagery out. We need to run the analysis, and that's going to help us locate predicted and known areas and get out there and knock it on the head while we can." Is that right?
Definitely. And in the United States, there's they've come up with mapping that essentially predicts when it will be green. And then knowing that the best time to spray Buffel is when it's about 50% green, it then lets land managers know where to target, when to target, to be most effective and really utilize those resources properly.
Fantastic. Okay, so that led you to actually getting out on reserve, which I bet was exciting, because it's always a bit of an adventure setting off into desert country, isn't it? How did that go?
So exciting, yeah. So just a few weeks ago, actually, I travelled out to Ethabuka. As you can see, there's a little plane that took off and landed 6 times before I eventually got off out in Western Queensland. And I spent the week driving around with Ellen Orbolt, the reserve manager, validating hundreds of suspected buffelgrass locations. So the image that you can see here is Ellen walking through what is a pretty large buffelgrass infestation, and it's actually the site from that previous slide that I showed you where we had those predictions, and the little red circle is roughly where we are on that map. We, again, validated hundreds of points across both reserves, got an idea of what worked well, what didn't work so well, and ways to improve the method. We'd take a photo at each point and identify the flora there and make a note of if it was Buffel or not. And I'm currently in the process of compiling all that information and building those reserve maps that I was telling you about. This photo on the screen I absolutely love. So if you've seen buffelgrass in the environment, you'll absolutely understand why it's a problem. Many of you have probably driven around the countryside and seen it, but if you haven't, I think that this picture really conveys that message. You could draw a line down the middle. On the left-hand side, you have nothing but this sort of buffelgrass monoculture smothering out anything else. And on the right, you have this nice, healthy desert ecosystem with, many different plants. So I snapped that one out of that site and just thought, it's very worth showing everybody.
That is quite a powerful picture. It's always one of the most effective ways of illustrating something, isn't it? The sort of before and after, or the side by side, each side of that. So, Ella, in the comments, I've seen that some praise for how succinctly you described the work, but also a question about the greening up response. Where Nick said, wouldn't the native grasses have the same response to rainfall, where of course they all green up as well? But perhaps you could just take us through again you mentioned it was the time lag in the response, wasn't it? The Buffel came on early and was a brighter green, and the native vegetation came a bit later and was not quite such a bright green.
I think, yeah, and Nick, that's such a good question. And you're right, it comes down to timing. So buffel grass, it's the analogy I can use, it's like the sports car at the traffic lights. When it rains, it just takes off and it greens really quickly. And we were looking at a period that was after a long time of no rain. So everything had dried and hayed off, and it was yeah, very dry. You get this rainfall, buffel grass greens up very quickly, and you have to try and capture that moment in time just before all the other vegetation greens up. But you're right, it is challenging.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks for that. So how do you see this project really assisting bush heritage and other landowners, in fact, to protect the incredible landscapes and species that we have out on Pilungah and Ethabuka?
Yeah, look, accurately detecting and mapping buffel grass and locating where it is can really help reserve managers and ecologists in their efforts to manage it. It can also assist in their decision making when it comes to controlled burning, because the last thing you want to do is go and burn a patch of buffel grass to only have it recolonize that whole area. Another exciting use for the data that comes out of this internship is that it can be used as an input into a model that's going to be developed by a researcher, Eva Yu. So she's an honours student at Bush Heritage as part of the data team, and she'll be undertaking that research to look at how you can combine this information with other variables to predict where buffel is in the environment. It ultimately provides a sense of where buffel is on the reserve. It provides additional methods for bush heritage to use, and it provides inputs to those models that I was just telling you about.
Fantastic. And we're seeing some nice pictures coming up now of some of the desert flowers that you get after good rains when it's not buffel grass.
Yes.
So I don't know whether you saw Ethabuka in that sort of conditions, Ella. Were there any wildflowers while you were there?
It was amazing. So there's
Was
been
it?
sort of
Yeah.
immense rainfall over from the start of this year, and it was just, yeah, it was just beautiful. It was green. I was so surprised to get to the desert, and it was just lush and green and quite beautiful. Yeah.
Yes, I know for a lot of, certainly for overseas visitors, but certainly for Australians, the conception that the arid zones are permanently dusty and dry is true 90% of the time, but when it isn't, it is truly amazing, isn't it? As it lights up. So you're very
Absolutely.
fortunate to have seen that. Well, listen, thank you for taking us through that process. We have had a few questions coming in that I'd like to chuck your way, if I may. The first one was, and this may be a horticultural question, so you may not have the answer to this, but there's a question that has has there been a shade tolerant version of buffel grass developed? Why anybody would want to do that, unless you're a pastoralist, I don't know, but that's probably who was driving it. But are you aware of any, a shade tolerant version that is being deliberately
Um,
cultivated?
I'm I'm not, I don't specifically know, but I do know that there's been taxonomic uncertainty with Buffel purely because of its there's many cultivars bred
Mm.
sort of selectively bred for different reasons. So to adapt to whatever landscape it was used in at the time. But I can't answer that one, sorry.
No, no, that's fine. We'll see if we got an expert on board who might know something about that one. Um, Another question was, you referred to the chemical spraying, which is the commonest form of control, and
Mhm.
the question about whether that's safe for ecosystems and the environment, which is, I think, a general question true of every land manager who has to spray.
Mhm.
So, are you familiar with what spraying regime we use and can contribute to that? An
Yeah,
answer
I
to
have
that?
a little bit of an idea. Now, I know that with glyphosate and flupropanate, one is specific, from what I understand, and will target buffel only. The other is general, so you wouldn't go and spray it on a number of plants for it to only impact. It would impact those other plants. So it's about using the right spray for the job.
And I'm familiar with there's a very special formulation that we use on the African lovegrass down in
Mhm.
Scottsdale, which is a very specific blend to minimise damage to the natives, and the spraying is done at certain times. So you knock back the active growing lovegrass, you don't knock back the natives which have gone dormant in the
Mm.
cooler weather. So thanks for that. What my question here? A comment saying, "Lovely presentation, thank you." And your prediction accuracy of your model. Have you been able to test that and done any sort of post rainfall analysis to see how accurate your predictions are?
That is a work in progress. So given that I've only come back with the data, I think I've had one
Still
work
working
day
on it.
since I've been back. Still working on it. Very
Yeah,
interested to get that out there, though. It's not perfect, that's for sure. It's not the silver bullet. It did, and I suppose a challenge was it did detect other vegetation that might have access to standing water or other grass, one other grass or two other grass types that were very similar to Buffel. But overall, I was pleasantly surprised to see that we were detecting Buffel. Another
mm,
issue was in some cases it wouldn't detect Buffel. That's going to be because I chose a very conservative threshold, which I will lower and get a better
gotcha.
picture now of how much of that it's picking up.
Fine tuning of the process. Yeah, excellent. There's a question also about it's to do with kind of work out a phrase this. Did you get any enough time to know what the buffalo is out competing? Because you showed us that image that showed when it takes over, it's everything. But are there any specific native grasses or specific flora that are more heavily impacted by it that literally disappear?
Oh goodness. I think the issue with Buffel is it transforms entire ecosystems. So its impact is far reaching, and when it's out competing the native veg, so the grasses, maybe
Mm,
your Mitchell grass or other native grasses, spinifex, or causing those fires that go through those areas, then any of the species that are reliant upon those ecosystems are subsequently impacted. Yeah.
yeah, okay. And it looked like from the area you showed us on the images that the buffels seem to be around the creek lines. Is that a correct assumption that it favours that, like most plants do, or is
Yeah,
it more widely distributed in the landscape?
it was interesting. It loves a low-lying area, and you're right, it loves a drainage line or a road. It really likes disturbance, so
Mm.
it'll often be along a roadside. But yeah, certainly in the drainage lines, and Pilungah being channel country, plenty of drainage lines. So we'd see it in those lower areas. Often I would make the observation that when I'd get a little bit higher up, I'd see a little bit less buffel.
Okay. Now, there's a question here which can lead us into the little final segment we wanted to do about your trip out there, which was, did you encounter much wildlife out there or
Ah,
notice more in the non-Buffalo area? So please answer that with reference to native wildlife. And then I think that's a lovely segue to perhaps talk to some of the other parts of your adventure and the social aspects of what it's like being out in the bush.
yeah, sure. So that is a great question. And I saw some amazing wildlife out there. So brolgas and beautiful birds, finches, flocking pigeons, as well as red kangaroos, central bearded dragons. A lot of really, the bird life was amazing. Just also just the abundance, I suppose, of these
Mm,
flocks of budgies and cockatiels, and it was, yeah, beautiful wildlife, really amazing. Some emus, just great.
nice.
Yeah.
Nice, nice. And you also had some fun with the with Helene and Kyle, didn't you? And their family, which we thought we should share with people because
Yeah.
it's part of bush life, isn't it? That when you're doing your science and research, you've also got to muck in and help out with the family and enjoy family life out on reserve.
I think that's right. And I definitely wanted to mention the people that I got to spend time with out on the reserve because it is a really important part of the bush heritage story too. So I got to spend the week with two wonderful volunteers from Melbourne, Andrew and Leonie, who have been volunteering with Bush Heritage for a number of years now, and they've spent a few trips out on Ethabuka. They're helping Ellen to map area and grass wren habitat, and that will be really
Mm.
helpful for upcoming bird surveys. They're just lovely people. They have a wealth of experience, and it was just a pleasure to spend the week with them learning about their experiences with bush heritage. And of course, Helene and Kyle. So they just made my trip so memorable. They looked after me the whole time, and it was a great experience for me to be able to spend so much time with Helene in the field. She's not only a really amazing ecologist, but she's just a capable and kind person. She was an awesome manager throughout this whole internship. Very experienced, very kind, and just really supportive overall. It was a unrivaled learning opportunity for me.
Fantastic. And I think we've got a picture up here of what people do in the bush during the Olympics. Is that
Yeah,
right?
that's right. So on the weekend out there, the local school, and when I say local, it's a 2-hour drive from the reserve. But the local school and some surrounding schools, Birdsville and Boulia, held a sports carnival, and not only did the kids compete, but the adults got involved too. And we called it the local Olympics because obviously the Olympics had just started, and Kyle, the reserve manager, just absolutely smashed it. I think he took home gold in a few of the events. And you can see Ellen and Kyle playing tennis out in that vast landscape.
So that's a wonderful image that we found. Yes, that is what you do when you need to do some sport and you're in the bush, and all you've got is a fence line and a couple of rackets. So wonderful. Well, Ella, listen, thank you so much for sharing your time and your research with us. It's wonderful to see what a useful tool that's going to become. Um, we're a bit running out of time now. There were still some questions we wanted to put. There are a number of questions. As usual, what we'll try and do is the ones we haven't got to, we'll find the right expertise. There were questions about buffel grass affecting princess parrots. Has it got to Tasmania yet? Which you may not be able to answer, Ella, but we will see if our knowledge base of experts can help with that. And a request for a link to the US mapping and research you mentioned around
Yep.
buffel grass going green. So we'll coordinate that and pass those on to the wonderful people who've joined us today. I hope everybody's enjoyed this deep dive. As always, it's so nice to hear what's happening early in a career and with the enthusiasm and energy that is being put into supporting the conservation work. So, Ella, thank you very much. Hopefully, I'll bump into you somewhere time up in Queensland as you continue your career. And if anybody's interested in finding out about the Seeding the Future program, then we'll put a link in the chat. And just want to finish up by saying thank you so much to all our wonderful supporters. As always, you've had to take time out on a busy day to listen to this. I know that's not great sacrifice when you've got somebody as wonderful as Ella talking to you, but we do appreciate your support and towards our conservation work and making sure that we have some healthy country that is protected forever. So last plug, our next webinar will be broadcast spring one, when I'll be coming to you live from WA at our Uradi Reserve. And we may have a spectacular wildflower session in full bloom. So hopefully we'll get some lovely images for you when I talk to the reserve managers over there. So thanks everybody for joining. Thanks, Ella, for sharing with us your project today, and see you all next time. Thank you. Bye.